I guess we'll commence the question and answer session. So I can see that there's a vibrant, question activity happening. There is for people who don't know, there's a pigeonhole system, which is an electronic system in which you can just log in to pigeonhole.at and enter the event code and either vote on the existing questions or ask your own, specific question. It's pigeonhole.at and the event passcode is SADC 2016. So one of the first questions that I wanted to ask you, Mohan, was we are seeing a huge proliferation of apps. And if you look at smartphones, they are also a kind of real estate. You can't have it to be too crowded. People can't juggle through 15 different screens. So how do you see this proliferation shaping out, and do you see new technologies emerging? How do you see that going?
Well, I think the first thing that's happening is, as in elsewhere, you're getting aggregators of apps. So you aggregate all the apps and use one app to do what you want. For example, in e-commerce, you use one app to put in what you want to buy, and it goes all over the place and comes out with the best price and anything like that. So aggregation is taking place. On top of that, now bots are coming up. The bots are piece of software which do the entire function. They act very independently. And the bots give you much more than what you want, and they have a layer of AI embedded in them, and it's happening. So all over you see this kind of innovation happening, but the key drive is the individual is getting empowered through a layer of technology which gives him or her the choice to do many, many things and gets the best deal anywhere in the marketplace.
So the next question for Vijay. What were some of the challenges that you faced while you were creating or architecting the Startup India initiative? You mentioned that there were a few case studies and that you faced many obstacles.
There are many obstacles which I listed also in my presentation. I would just give you one brief example to exemplify. There was a company who was a small startup drug discovery company who was working on a very niche treatment on cancer. Those two guys who actually sold their houses to start this business, they were actually on the threshold of signing a deal with one big multinational. And they didn't have capital to achieve something which the potential partner was asking them to achieve. So finally they went, because there is no fund available and they wanted very quickly to achieve something, so they finally went into their relatives and some gray market to at exorbitant interest rate to achieve that. And finally that IP was patented, licensed out to Roche. The interesting part is the total deal was around more than $300 million, and they got $35 million upfront after so much of the struggle. But the existing system said that they had to pay 30% capital gain on the very first day the check was deposited in their bank. So that was kind of the issue, that first you don't have enough funding at the time where you need the funding most, and when you get some reward, you immediately pay very high tax rate. So this is something very peculiar situation in India, and this new startup policy actually addressing both of them. So this is only one example. I can give you several examples like that, but I guess this will exemplify how the government is thinking in an integrated fashion.
Excellent. Saurabh, I have a question for you. It's from the audience, there has been a huge jump in startups in the recent times. However, only few are successful. What is your advice for them towards making their businesses sustainable?
Well, the issue of very few startups being successful is not an Indian issue. Globally, it's a very small fraction of startups that are successful. And that must be the case, because if all you do is to do what you think is a very staid business in a small way, you're not taking enough risk. So there will always be a very small percentage of startups that are successful. But those startups will actually change the world. But as a piece of advice, what I would say to people is just 2 or 3 things. If you're doing a startup and you think that the single biggest reason you'll succeed is because you're smarter than all the other people and you'll do something, they don't know what they're doing, you can do it faster, you can do it cheaper, you can whatever. If you're predicating your success on being smarter than everybody else, you will fail, because the world is full of people who are smarter than you. So unless you're doing something that's uniquely different, unless you're doing something very differently, you're not going to succeed. And the second thing I would just say to people is, I mean, there are lots of things on markets and all the rest, but what I would say the second most important thing is, if I look at startups, and I must have invested in maybe 100 by now in the last 10, 15 years, there's one common thing that stands out. Majority of failures are not because they chose a bad technology, they had the wrong product, they chose a bad market. Majority of them fail because they do not know how to create and run their organization. They don't get along with their team, the team members fall out, they can't build an organization, they're not able to bring in people other than themselves, people better than themselves to cover the gaps that they have in their knowledge base. Most of them fail around organizational issues. If you want to scale and you're the only person who's a whiz kid in your company, you will not scale. You'll be limited by 24 hours in a day. So you want to scale apart from the market being right, the product being right, technology being right. If you cannot get a lot of people better than you to come work with you and help you scale, you have no hope in hell.
May I add one thing to what you said, which is, I think one of the elements that that's certainly prevalent in Silicon Valley is that a failure is not a terrible thing. So if you're somebody who's gone off, founded something, gave it a true shot, 3 years, whatever, you're actually respected for having sort of stuck it out and tried. Yeah. And I think sort of to the spirit of the question, it's not a bad thing as long as you did it right.
In fact, there's a nice saying around it, saying that you only failed when you've given up. Till you've given up, right, you're fine.
Do we have time for one last question?
Yeah, Steve. Yeah.
We're out of time?
Just one last question, if you allow. Okay, so Steve, this question is for you. What could possibly be the government strategy to encourage startups while ensuring that the big market players are not at the receiving end? I mean, we see companies getting disrupted by startups. I mean, how would you, what could be the government strategy to deal with that?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not very sure when it says, well, ensuring the big market players are not at the receiving end. So I'll say it 2 ways. One is our hope, and my goal is not to represent government. The goal is Singapore wishes to try and fill useful niches where it's helpful, but always wants the private sector to lead and to push. So it's not government's goal to encourage startups as much as if we can be useful at some point, that would be our wish, but our goal is always private sector. In terms of big corporates, we have lots of big corporates that work with us because they're very anxious about what they don't know. So they love startups because there's a culture and an energy and the canary in the coal mine, which is what might be coming that a big corporate doesn't necessarily hear or see. That's point one. But point two is, if there's something which is a better version of or an improvement upon something that's gone on before, it's not to try and protect incumbents. I mean, our goal is, what can we do to move important topics forward? The ones we touched on, transportation, health, energy, these big, globally shared challenges. So we see corporates as an important part of the solution. If the corporates are disrupted, candidly, that's for them as business leaders to be thinking about and worrying about.
Great, thanks. I think with this, we'll wrap up the session.
Thank you very much. I wish we had more time to hear from the panel, but time's running short. Panel, please remain on stage. I'd like to invite our Ambassador Gopinath Pillai, Chairman of ISAS NUS, and Ambassador at Large, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Singapore, to present tokens of appreciation. Ms. Unikrishnan first. Mr. Leonard. Dr. Chautaiwale. Mr. Gupta. Mr. Pai. And Dr. Srivastava.